12. Western Springs expression of interest. Right, let's be respectful and welcome to everyone watching here in person or online. This item is only about whether to go out to consult on the future of Western Springs. We've held workshops on this and there's a lot of material in the agenda. We asked for this to come back to the governing body and now it has. If you have amendments, please get them all done at once in writing to Sandra with an R and we can address each one. I'll move this and will the Deputy Mayor second it? Thank you very much for that. Who's addressing us here? Max, please, welcome to the table, to opening the address on this here. What we've moved and seconded is up there. We received their report and Tautaki resolved 3 things and we agreed to consult on those things. And the proposed communication and engagement plan for the proper consultation process, noting that it will go from late May to mid-June. All right, and following that, the governing body intends to adopt a preferred option for Western Springs. And Tautaki will be subject to a business case, due diligence and agreement on commercial terms. That's in effect what we're discussing today. That is what we are discussing today, Councillor. I'll hand this to Max, who's leading this.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be joined by Nick Hill, Chief Executive of Tautaki, momentarily. I think he had 1:50 as the time the meeting was going to start back, so he's on his way from Aotea. So he'll join in a moment, but we don't need to delay for him. So thank you, Mayor. The paper has been circulated and I will take it as read. I'm not going to summarise the paper, which is quite comprehensive. I will just briefly introduce the item and then I will invite Nick to speak on behalf of Tautaki Auckland Limited. The purpose of the report is to seek a decision from the governing body on whether to proceed with public consultation on options for Western Springs. The report sets out the findings of a formal public expression of interest process led by Tautaki Auckland Limited on future options for the stadium. It also includes initial councillor officer analysis of the 3 options that emerged from that process and then seeks your approval to consult the public on those options. Why consult the public? Proceeding with consultation is recommended by council officers, was requested by Tautaki and was supported by the Waitemata and Albert Eden local boards at recent workshops held with them. Legal advice that we've received confirms that it is an available and appropriate course of action in the current circumstances. While you could choose to indicate a preferred option in the consultation material, and Tautaki, the board of Tautaki have in fact done that, our advice is that it would be better at this stage to remain open on the options and to invite feedback on those options. The reason we support consultation, briefly, is that consultation will allow the public to have a say on those options, which are likely to be of high public interest. And the options, we believe, based on our initial assessment, could make a material contribution to the objectives that the council is seeking through its stadium network and investment. These include a more vibrant city with good events, greater community cohesion, a healthy and active city, and economic opportunities that go along with those things. So there are these potential positive benefits, and it would allow for broader feedback on the future use of Western Springs as well. The consultation approach that we suggest is consistent with the principles set out in the stadium investment objectives that emphasise the importance of understanding demand and community views. So it's consistent with those decisions that we made at the last meeting. I think it's important we do not lose sight of of the importance of the asset. This is a highly valuable public space and a significant city asset, and we have a responsibility to ensure it delivers benefits for Aucklanders, including providing for a range of diverse needs and helping the network as a whole be more utilised and financially sustainable and better aligned with our plans. So those decisions do require some trade-offs. Not everyone will agree with final decisions, so this process allows the public to be part of the conversation, and that's the right next step. If the consultation process is approved, it will be run by the Council's engagement team, who have just successfully delivered the annual plan consultation, and it will include a 4-week consultation period, the regional organisational interest group sessions, so the hearings-style sessions that allow the sort of most interested groups to speak directly to you, the governing body, and it will include independent review of the consultation materials to ensure that they are robust and fair. At the conclusion of consultation, staff would report back to the governing body with a summary of the feedback and recommendations, including further analysis. A preferred option could be endorsed by you at that stage. However, it's important to note that any final implementation would remain subject to due diligence, a full business case, and commercial negotiations consistent with our stadium investment objectives. In summary, and final points, you are not being asked today to make a decision on the future use of Western Springs Stadium. The decision is whether to proceed with public consultation following a formal expression of interest process, which will allow Aucklanders to have a say on how this space could best serve our city. And I'll ask Nick to speak briefly, and then very happy to answer questions.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks, Max. I just want to say a few things. Tātaki owns and operates Western Springs Stadium under a trust deed. That trust deed sets out the purposes of supporting a vision for Auckland as a vibrant city and attracting world-class events, and to develop and maintain a range of world-class arts, culture, heritage, leisure, sport and entertainment venues that are attractive both to residents and visitors to Auckland. And in doing that, we are asked to manage the facilities on a prudent commercial basis and operate as successful, financially sustainable community assets. So the key for us as an organisation is to focus on how well those assets are used and utilised, and we think primarily about the ticketed use of venues, which is this year well over 2 million tickets, with a particularly important metric around the cost to serve. And this is something that the council have asked us to put front and centre in terms of the way that we operate the facilities. Cost to serve is the contribution that ratepayers make towards each of those tickets that are sold. And we've been asked to look at how to reduce that reliance on that ratepayer contribution, which means we need to look at more commercial revenue streams, larger commercial revenue streams, and or private investment and contribution towards the way in which the business operates. So when we look at Western Springs Stadium, there are a number of opportunities to think about how that might be used to increase revenue and to increase investment. That's not reliant on the ratepayer. And we talk regularly with the tenants of the stadium, which includes and has included Speedway, Ponsonby Rugby, concert promoters, but also a number of other individuals and groups who approach us with ideas about what might be possible. And particularly at this time, that's precisely what we understand the council's asked us to do, is to look at what those sorts of options might be. To deal with that, we set up an expression of interest process, so we could treat transparently and fairly with any of those parties who have proposals on how the stadium might be used. That expression of interest process was developed with professional advice following government policy around these processes. It was an open process, meaning anybody could participate, and it was listed formally on the GETS website, which is the way the government and the council makes sure these processes are open, transparent, and formally available to people. And once we received the proposals, we had an evaluation panel that included our external parties who brought expertise to the evaluation of it. We retained PwC as an independent probity advisor all the way through the process from the outset and documentation right through to the point at which the board considered recommendations on how to proceed with the options that were generated by the process. The PwC report has been circulated with the paper. The process prior to the board considering recommendations included workshopping the options with councillors, and it also involved briefing the local boards most affected by any development of Western Springs, which brings us to the point at which the board a month ago considered the options and made the decision, the provisional decision, that the best option and the one that stood out clearly in terms of the board's obligations under the trust deed was option 1, which is called Auckland Arena in the council paper. And that's because it quite clearly is financially far more beneficial to Auckland ratepayers, but also it is investment into infrastructure that supports football and basketball, which are the fastest growing participation sports and sports that are, in terms of fan and other commercial interest in Auckland, and they are sports that are struggling for infrastructure and lack capacity, and the proposal in option 1 from Anna Mowbray, Ali Williams, Bill Foley and Bennett Rosenthal offers to help with that problem. There are a bunch of other aspects to it which are beneficial, but in many ways they're second order to the core proposition here that there will be more use of the facility and it will be financially more beneficial to ratepayers by $18 million on our initial analysis of the financial consequences of the various options. So we are now, which brings us to today, where that provisional decision is one that we cannot, as Tātaki, take any further until we have, with the council, undertaken consultation to understand what Aucklanders think about these options. We think that it is difficult to contemplate doing any more work in terms of the cost until we have a clear idea whether the option 1 or the other option or the status quo is what is supported by Aucklanders. We do support the council officer's recommendation that the consultation is for both of the options and the status quo. And I'd just like to thank all of the participants in the expression of interest process for their patience, for the passion that they brought to this to the opportunities that they're looking at for Western Springs Stadium, and the professionalism. I believe that the process that we have run is sound and robust. We've received professional advice all the way through it, and that I just want to finish on that point, but make one final point is there is a lot of discussion around Speedway. I just want to take the opportunity to say in this meeting that the option or the work on Waikaraka Park to develop it as a venue that can cater to all Speedway classes has received resource consent. It is earthworks and works have started, and that as of today, I'm advised that it is on time and on budget to meet its delivery date, and that we have legal confirmation that all of the parties are agreeing to commit to this as the venue for all classes of Speedway. So with that, I'll go back to you, Max.
Thanks, Nick. Just open to questions, Your Worship.
I've got questions, first of all, from Councillor Newman, please.
So just to clarify, the wording in A Roman numeral 1, requesting that the council seek feedback, but that Tātaki at Roman numeral 2 has agreed its currently preferred option is Auckland Arena option 1. Would you agree that that tends to suggest that Tātaki's got a preferred position, and how does that get resolved if the feedback from Aucklanders is not in favour of Tātaki's preferred position but prefers a different position?
I think the purpose of consultation is to gather more information, and the feedback you're seeking is what do Aucklanders think about it, and that would provide us with guidance on whether or not there's the support to do something that is as significant and transformational as the proposal in option 1. So I think that feedback the board could quite easily take account of the nature of that feedback in terms of its further decision, but then ultimately would need this body to provide a mandate to move forward.
Sorry, I had another question, but just to follow up on this, because I'm a bit confused by that, because as I interpret it, you're looking at how the feedback would inform your thinking before you're proceeding with likely option 1, or have I misunderstood? I mean, are you open to a different option, to option 1?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are open to a different option, but in terms of the work that's been done and the information that's been provided to us to this point, the board believes that supports option 1.
Could I just add a brief point to that? So it is also available to the governing body to adopt a preferred option for consultation, and that is in fact the usual, I would say the more normal process is that this council, before consulting, adopts a preferred option for the purpose of that consultation. So it wouldn't be unusual for us to do so, but it's not the advice of council officers that you do so in this case. And I think that's consistent with what Tātaki has done. They've got a preferred option now. That is clearly still subject to feedback, and if the feedback didn't support that option, I am clear that they would be prepared to change their mind.
Okay, well, I'm not sure I'm quite so clear, but can I just understand then so what we've talked about with the stage 1 funding for Waikaraka Park, and this is the first time I've ever been able to speak about this on the governing body table, so I'm a bit curious about this. So the stage 1 funding, the $11 million, I've received advice on that. What commitments have we received for the subsequent stages to fund that? We've talked about all the parties are in agreement. How much are all the parties putting in for stage 2?
I'm not aware of where any discussions have got to on stage 2 or any commitments that are made at stage 2. As far as Tātaki is concerned, we're focused on stage 1, and stage 1 allows all classes to consolidate at Waikaraka Park.
Okay, are we aware is there ever a point where we're going to be having a conversation about the subsequent stages to be funded, because at the moment what we're talking about is a very narrow definition of the investment at Waikaraka Park, and I think there's a bit of conjecture as to whether there is the level of stakeholder buy-in for the subsequent stages. So is there ever a point, and when is that point, when the subsequent stages, the funding and the delivery of that will come into the conversation?
Yeah, so look, I understand the question, but I don't think I can answer those. I think our obligation is towards achieving that first stage, and that's what we're focused on.
But you're comfortable that all the parties are likely to be there or thereabouts for the subsequent stages when that conversation happens?
I would hope so. Certainly people have talked about the opportunity that creates, but the purpose and the objective here is to enable Speedway to consolidate safely with all classes at Waikaraka Park. That we haven't sought to achieve anything beyond that, but there is an opportunity to do that in the future.
Your Worship, there is a conflict with a storm recovery meeting for Councillor Ferry and myself now, which is commencing now. It's unfortunate timing. I need to go and attend the storm recovery, but I would ask to be recalled should a vote be taken on this matter, please.
Can we have an assurance around that?
I've committed to relay where the meeting's at to Councillor Fletcher.
Have you finished with your question there, Councillor Newman? The next question is Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to foreshadow an amendment. I've given it to Sandra. The scope of this, maybe the question to you, Mr. Hardy. I've sat in these, as I've said before today, in not a comfortable environment for someone like myself, and I'm just here representing the public, trying to bring their voice to the table. The number of times I've sat here, 2 or 3, I can give you the examples later, where I've been told, no, everything's in, this is all about talking to the public and getting their idea, and then after this meeting, at other meetings and subsequent meetings, I'm told, out of scope. No one in my area of town would believe that an amendment which has got an option and one already being the preferred option is actually a fair and reasonable request for the public to give their opinion again. So, how can I be sure that that the Speedway is back in scope, or is it not?
Thanks, Councillor. Just on the first point you made, and I want to be clear, we are not, as council staff, recommending that you adopt a preferred option. So we are saying that recommending that you consult on all 3 options sort of evenly. That it is open to you to adopt a preferred option. I don't think it's inherently unfair for you to do so. In fact, it's our normal approach because it gives the public a better indication about where you might be. If there was a clear consensus emerging, it gives the public a clearer indication about where you're likely to go, and that actually assists them in providing you with feedback, if that is what was happening. But I don't think it is. So that's the first part. In terms of option 3. It is clearly identified in the paper that will seek public input on all options. So we will not proceed with the 2 EOI options. We will either do nothing, or we will explore any other options that the public wish us to explore. So it's deliberately open-ended, and while it does not include any specific proposal related to Speedway, it is open-ended and designed to capture broader feedback. So any member of the public who has a view will be able to present that view, and then the governing body will be able to consider it.
And just a question on the legal, there's so much stuff, it's hard to read it all, but I've done my best, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue this morning, get an email from one of our legal people, and in there's a letter from a KC, and, it said confidential, so I don't know what I'm supposed to say or not say, but that was clearly the advice of a King's Council, that we do not proceed while there is a court injunction against council on our processes thus far. Why would we carry on? Why would we go down this track?
Thanks, Councillor, and I can ask Meredith to address your question as well, but the first point is that, and with all due respect to the King's Council you referred to, she was not advising the council. So her role is to advocate for the interests of her client, and she was doing that. So so you do have access to legal advice to my left, and the very clear advice that we've received is that the existence of that judicial review litigation does not prevent you from proceeding with consultation. And if you would like to hear that
Does
directly.
the person who pays the most money get the answer they want, do they? Yeah, it depends who is the law variable like that, is it?
Meredith?
You're saying that I couldn't take a King's Council's advice because it came from the opposite side of the debate.
It's not
as
advice
a variable.
to you, Councillor.
She acts in the interests of her client, which is the Western Springs Speedway. She acts in the interests of her client, which is the Western Springs Speedway Association. And yes, she has written to you, telling you that she considers that you should delay. Our advice to you is that we recommend that you proceed to consultation. The judicial review does not prevent you from making the decisions that are before you today, and we would in fact recommend that you go out and speak to Aucklanders about what they want for the future of Western Springs Stadium. There is no application for interim orders in place. You are legally entitled to proceed in the circumstances, and as I said, our advice is that you do so.
Thank you. And, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I will have an amendment. Yep. Deal with that now. Okay. So, I've finished my questions. I just wanted to say that I had an amendment that I'd put through.
Yeah, we've received those, but I'm just going through questions because there are other people who've got
Thank you.
questions about this. Councillor Sayers has a question.
I did. I just had one pop up for the legal person, Meredith. Sorry. So Meredith, thank you. Can you just explain a little bit further legally, if the judicial review found in favour of the association, Speedway Association, and there was some sort of flaw in our process, when we go ahead with this consultation, I'm just concerned that, what happens at that point, there seems to be some wisdom in waiting until that judicial review is done. I know your advice is against that, but you also mentioned there's some other things that haven't been filed against us. So could you just step me through what technically happens from a legal point of view if that judicial review is lost or ruled against Auckland Council?
We could be waiting a very long time for a decision on the judicial review. So you remember the accommodation provider targeted rate proceedings. That took 5 years until we got to the Supreme Court and got a final decision out of that. In circumstances where potentially we could have quite a significant delay before the court took any decision, we don't think that it's necessary for you to delay, particularly in relation to a decision around consultation. We can have another conversation when we come back following consultation on your ultimate decision making. But certainly for the purposes of consultation, we don't think it's necessary for you to delay. And in the circumstances of this particular judicial review, our recommendation to you is that you do not delay.
Could I I think that's a great answer, but I do want to add that, so beyond the legal position, So you can think about the merits of delaying, but we also need to look at the consequences of delay. So delaying consultation would essentially defer the ability for public to give their input on the future of Western Springs for an indefinite period of time, a period of time we can't be sure about. And given the strong public interest in the decisions, that's not a desirable outcome in our view. It would also be unfair to the EOI applicants who have participated in the process according to its requirements, in good faith through that formal process, and then would be faced with an indefinite delay for a yes or no answer to their proposal. And there is a risk that they would not remain engaged in the process because it'd been paused indefinitely. These things don't last forever. And that would ultimately then result in a situation where the public would never get a chance to have a say on those options. So there is consequences of delay. It is an option available to you, but it's not something we recommend.
With all due respect, I don't feel my question was quite answered in terms of if there was a ruling against. So it goes through, it might be a number of months away, and the ruling is actually against the Auckland Council. Does it, it seems that would undermine all the work that's been done previously, and we do have to go back to square one, or do contracts suddenly become null and void,
So the remedy they are seeking is that the Auckland Council decision be set aside, and the Auckland Council decisions that they are challenging is the refusal of members of Speedway an opportunity to present their views and a refusal to provide key information. But I think the council decision that they are seeking to have set aside is what they call the removal of Speedway from Western Springs and consolidation of Speedway at Waikaraka Park. The decision specifically being challenged is the decision of the 24th of October of last year, that funding decision. There has been a decision to consolidate Speedway at Waikaraka Park, but your decisions on the future of Western Springs Stadium haven't yet been made. And what we're proposing to do today is to go out and consult on what those future decisions for Western Springs should be. And look, it might be that where you get to at the end of this is your option ideas, and those other ideas could, of course, include Speedway.
Okay, thank you. So my other questions were for you, Nick, just a couple of things that I wanted you to have the chance to elaborate on. You mentioned about how you consulted with Speedway in this process, all the tenants. I think you're talking about the tenants, you went around and you spoke to them all. Can you just clarify, because it's still a question mark I've got in my mind, could you just clarify who in Speedway you consulted with? I'm under the impression that you consulted with a promoter representing the sport, or did you consult with each club? Could you just elaborate on that?
We consulted with our tenant, which was Palmerston North Speedway. So they're the ones we had the legal commercial relationship with. We didn't consult beyond that.
Okay. Thank you for that. You also mentioned about, also Waikaraka Park.
Sorry, Max has just reminded me. We also undertook location analysis, which involved talking to all of the parties in the industry.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I guess I was just trying to...
Just behave, please. We're having trouble hearing the debate, so we don't need stuff in the background. And could you guys talk to your microphones rather than each other?
Thank you. I was trying to clarify just if you'd spoken with one party or the clubs involved, so that was the reason for my question. The Waikaraka Park, Nick, in terms of its development, I've been out and had a look at Speedway, and they have a fence. So when the little open wheel cars whip around their track, there's a fence there that if they roll, they hit that fence. At Waikaraka Park, they seem to have more of a kind of a block of concrete that absorbs the car's impacts as they hit those walls. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the safety. In fact, those been quite different designs going forward with those little cars. If those little cars roll and they roll onto the edge of that concrete bund, you can imagine what could happen there. So can you just clarify in terms of that investment that's going in there, or required investments to make racing of open wheelers at Waikaraka Park safe?
Okay, look, I understand the question. James Parkinson's better qualified than me to answer something technically like that.
Thank you. I can confirm that the scope of work at Waikaraka Park includes alterations to the design of the safety fence such that it will be suitable for both the open wheel classes and the stock and saloon classes.
Thank you. And just if you're an expert on fences, are the fences, as a contingency, and we've always got that, we can always fall back. I know things are on track, but Waikaraka Park isn't ready in time. I understand Speedway can continue where it's at. Have the fencing been taken away there? I did see it on Trade Me for sale. Just wondering, what was going on there, and if that's gone, does that suddenly remove that ability?
The fence, the Western Springs fence, is still intact. I couldn't actually say whether it's in place or not. It's a demountable fence, but it is certainly available for use.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Fully, please.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair, and Max has answered my question in part. I was going to ask about, the open-endedness of the questions and whether that would allow the public to give feedback that doesn't necessarily fit neatly into those three options. I'm mindful that for my community, they're probably a bit more concerned about Ponsonby Rugby Club and wanting that to be included in some way in all three options. And so I'm thinking that they're going to want to give that kind of feedback that doesn't fit necessarily into those three options. If you could comment on that. Kia ora.
Yes, the proposed consultation would enable the public to give the feedback that you described, and the options that we worked up around option 3 for the purposes of analysis, and so that we can have some comparison, noting that it does have broad possibilities, included retaining the arrangements with Ponsonby Rugby.
Kia ora, thank you. And it's a very tight turnaround time frame for the consultation. Is there any extra effort being put in to reach out to communities that don't traditionally, engage in our processes? Kia ora.
Thanks, Councillor. We've got Wendy from the engagement team online to answer specific questions about the engagement process. And she's probably best to answer that question. I would say that the process that we have proposed is based on good or best practice. A 4-week consultation period is what we do for the long-term plan. And I think Wendy could probably address those other questions.
Kia ora. We have looked at all the interested and affected parties and made provision for everybody to give feedback in this consultation. We have got possibilities for translations into Te Reo and New Zealand Sign Language as part of languages that are official languages of New Zealand. That's at this stage, that is what we're doing, and we've also got the variety of channels through libraries, through the regional organisations and interest group sessions, and also the AK Have Your Say. So we're pretty much covered all groups. Kia ora.
Okay. Any provision for Pacific languages though?
Not specifically, but that is a consideration we can make. We can translate into Pacific languages if that's required. Yeah.
Yeah. Kia ora. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Walker, please.
Got a few questions. The first question is really just around whether or not we've got an overall network plan for the stadiums in Auckland that takes into account the Auckland Council-owned stadiums and Eden Park. Have we put in place any form of network plan at this stage? I don't think we have, but you're welcome to answer that.
No, we don't have a overarching network plan.
That's fine. Now, in respect of what we're proposing to go out with, and that is option 1, which is the Auckland FC option. I won't spell out what that entertains, but obviously you're talking about significant capacity. Option 2, 50,000 capacity for concerts. Option 3, which could be a variety of options. Will there be an impact on, in no particular order, Mount Smart, North Harbour Stadium, Eden Park? And I don't need a long-winded reply, but will there be an impact in terms of the content, for example, and investment and the like?
Yes, and we address the broader stadium and venue network impacts in paragraph 64 to 68 of the report, and table 6 provides that initial analysis for each of the stadiums and the general network.
So is that information, in your opinion, comprehensive enough for Aucklanders to consider, for example, what might be the impact on Eden Park in terms of content and its proposals around stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 and stage 4?
Yes, we believe that the information is sufficient for the public to be asked for their views on the options. There will need to be further analysis before a final decision was made and implementation of that decision, but it is sufficient for this stage in the process.
Okay, you say you think it's sufficient, so is it your considered view that a member of the public out there is going to have a very clear understanding on what the impact will be on Mount Smart, for example, and the council's investment in that asset and the content that may not be going there, and Eden Park? And further to that, what actual discussions have you had with Eden Park to get their feedback?
Well, just to answer the second question first, because it's the easiest, we've had several discussions directly with Eden Park. So I've met with the chair, deputy chair, and with Nick Sauntner, the chief executive, to discuss this, and we also asked for feedback in written form. As we say in the report, Eden Park, and the chair and the chief executive acknowledged that this morning, today, that had happened, and acknowledged their position, which we set out in the report, that they had not provided detailed feedback at this stage. They were focused on their asset, and they were committed to working with the council on these options to make sure that the network functioned, and they wanted to be a team player. So that's what, and to be honest, we were expecting, that was their decision, not to give us sort of more detailed feedback at that stage. They would be invited to do so again during the consultation. We nevertheless did go make an assessment about what we thought the high-level impact on Eden Park would be from the options, and we have provided that in the report. But that is based on council officer.
Okay. So given that you haven't had any detailed feedback from Eden Park, and I would suggest scarcely any feedback, that's my understanding, do you not think it appropriate that we should be having that feedback, given that we have endorsed Eden Park as the main stadium of choice, and given that establishes a track to support Eden Park through, you would assume, a number of stages? Why can't we have some information so that we know it and members of the public know it before we go out with information? Do you not consider that information is material to people?
Well, Councillor, we asked for the information from Eden Park and they declined to provide it. So
they didn't have time.
Well, they didn't ask for more time. They said that they didn't want to provide detailed feedback at this stage in the process, that they were committed to being a team player, and they would engage with the process at other stages of it. So, as you well know, and as we've discussed, the stadium network is interdependent. We are seeking a complementary network of venues, and decisions affect each other. That what we haven't gone down the path of is trying to come up with a sort of comprehensive strategy for every single stadium and network. What we have got is work underway consistent with our objectives to try and make decisions which will get us towards a complementary network of venues, and make sure when we are making decisions we are taking into account the impact on other venues, and that's what we are trying to support through this process.
So in respect of not getting information from Eden Park, was it more a matter that they couldn't give you information at that point in time, rather than they're not happy to give you information if they had more time? Because my understanding is that it is quite material to them.
No. We asked them for the information and they declined to provide it and said, I'm just going to end up repeating myself, sorry, Councillor, the answer is no.
The other question I've got is around our treatment of Speedway. So, in some communication from the council's lawyer, or in-house general counsel, Meredith Webb, there is the comment, and this is to Western Springs Speedway Association, the lawyer acting for them, Bronwyn Carruthers. Any information received from Western Springs Speedway Association will also be put before the governing body at this meeting. That meeting is this meeting today. Is that information being put before this meeting today? Because my understanding is that there is information that has been received by council from the Western Springs Speedway Association previously and recently.
Yes, so the information that was received most recently from Western Springs Speedway Association, and which was the specific information that I was referring to in that letter, was supplied to you directly by the Western Springs Speedway Association earlier this week, and you have a copy of that information. We haven't added it to the agenda because the agenda had been published at the point at which we had received that information, and we informed the Western Springs Speedway Association of that. It will be appended to the minutes following this meeting, but I think in circumstances where you have a copy of the information via email, the information is before you. We will make it, as I said, publicly available in the minutes.
And it will be appended to the minutes. Okay, it is my understanding that the Western Springs Speedway Association comprises representatives and the involvement of all of the clubs, of all of the classes that actually constitute Speedway at Western Springs. Is that your understanding? I mean, I'm not talking about the promoter, I'm talking about the people that actually are Speedway. Are we clear on that? Can I have some comment there?
The Western Springs Speedway Association is a I understand incorporated society, so it's a membership-based organisation, and it comprises members who are participants or spectators at Speedway events. You know, in the earlier work that we've done, where we have spoken with members of various Speedway clubs, and with the most recent promoter of events at Speedway in Western Springs, the indications that we've had is that yes, there are a number of people involved who would like to see Speedway activities retained at Western Springs, and there are also a number of people who see Waikaraka Park as being the a good solution for the sport, a sustainable solution for the sport. So I don't think it's a monolithic perspective from all clubs and users, and the public consultation process obviously will be an opportunity for those who want to submit on a particular perspective about Western Springs to do so.
So just further to this, and further to the question that Councillor Newman asked about further investment into Waikaraka Park. If the promoter does not have the support of the people who are actually Speedway, and if Speedway make the decision that they do not want to have that promoter acting for them as promoter, because that is not council's decision, that's a decision internal within Speedway, what does that mean around the process, around what you're looking at in terms of Waikaraka Park and Speedway investment and the like? Is that something that you've considered, and is it material?
Yes, it is something we've considered. That the and really this goes back to the decisions that were made in October, and we did that activity of speaking with those the clubs which had been referred to in the report. The existing the most recent promoter is an experienced promoter who has been promoting events at Western Springs, and he's if there is an alternative use for Western Springs, so a venue hire agreement is not renewed at Western Springs, he's confident that they can consolidate the current activities at Waikaraka Park. So those who are currently racing and the clubs who have been racing at Western Springs will be able to race at Waikaraka Park, and indeed have done so when Western Springs was affected by the flooding.
Yeah, and just some quick clarification, it is the same promoter at both venues, is it not, Waikaraka Park and Western Springs?
The most recent promoter at Western Springs is also the proposed promoter at Waikaraka Park, yes.
And in the expression of interest process, is it the case on Tautaki's part that effectively there's that the promoter at Western Springs is contracted to shift Speedway to Waikaraka Park? There is an undertaking that was given by that promoter, that is my understanding, and that was part of the arrangement between Tautaki and the promoter.
There's nothing in the former venue hire agreement between Tautaki and Palmerston North Speedway that required them to shift. The agreement was a 4-year agreement, 2 years plus one, and the renewal ability was based on there not being an alternate venue for Speedway in Auckland. So if there was not an alternate, then there was the ability to renew for an additional year each time.
And there isn't a venue because Tautaki has declined to renew it at Western Springs. Is that not the case? That's a decision that Tautaki's made?
The reason for the upgrade works at Waikaraka Park is to provide that alternative venue.
And just to be clear, the upgrade work at Waikaraka Park is not like for like. There is nowhere near the capacity at Waikaraka Park as there is at Western Springs for Speedway events, particularly when they have a significant number of patrons. Is that the case?
The assessment that we have done is that the average crowds that have been attending Speedway over the last 4 years, and putting aside the COVID restricted periods, are less than the capacity available at Waikaraka Park.
Okay, the other, I'll just leave that. The other question I've got just goes to the earlier issue I raised about Western Springs Speedway Association being able to put before the governing body at this meeting their information. I would have thought that that would have meant that in respect of what we go out with, especially in respect of option 3, that Speedway would and should be an option. Otherwise, why are we entertaining this and encouraging it and being open to it and having received it if it actually can't go anywhere and Aucklanders aren't going to be made aware of it because we're not including it as an option in option 3, which is the status quo because Speedway has been at Western Springs and so has Ponsonby Rugby and so have concerts and other events.
No, well, first of all, we didn't make any undertaking to Western Springs Speedway Association that their information would be included in the consultation. So what we said was, if they provided us information, we would put it before the governing body so that you would be able to consider it when you make your decision today, and that is what we have done. The as the paper identifies, the consultation would seek public input on all options, including option 3, and option 3 is deliberately open-ended. We said our recommendation is that you approve consultation that frames option 3 as it is framed in the paper. That is the appropriate thing to do, given Tātaki has undertaken that EOI process, and we did not receive through that public EOI process a solution for Speedway to be at Western Springs, and therefore we have not subjected any other option to the same level of assessment, and in fact we don't have the same level of information about those other options. So it wouldn't be, in our view, fair or appropriate to include it as an explicit option, but it is fair and appropriate to include a general, non-specific option 3.
In the cold light of day, where Speedway has been at Western Springs since 1929, where this council as a body knows that the Speedway people want to stay at Western Springs, and that has been made known to this council, all of us here, on any number of occasions. And there's some reinforcement in the expectation that they can send us some information. Would it not be fair to actually have some mention of Speedway in option 3? Because that is the status quo and has been the case since 1929. What would be wrong with that if we're actually being open? Because I see a situation where it's the opposite, and we're actually being closed, and certainly as far as the Speedway fraternity is concerned, they see this whole process as a farce and set up to shut them out.
Point of order.
And I would suggest that...
Point of order,
fair crack
Chair.
of your whip there.
Are we in
That's a question.
Are we in questions? Because
Yes, this
Going
is
to
a
raise
question.
this. We're no,
So-
you're debating, so
No, this
I'm
is not a debate.
Other people have questions, so I'm going to move to Councillor
I
Lee,
just
please.
have a question. Why wouldn't be...
Mayor,
we be
you had
Mate, you've had your crack, and those you wandered off questions into debate and arguing now. So I want Councillor Lee, who's the next person to ask his speech. Please.
Thank you. And this is really a technical question, and it's directed to Mr. Hill, who's an experienced CCO Chief Executive Officer. Are the decision-making obligations of the Local Government Act, Section 76 to 78 in particular, are they ever a matter of consideration or having regard to when it comes to board decisions?
The short answer is ultimately they are.
They are.
But the council delegates authority through the legislation to the CCO to make decisions within a defined set of parameters. And when we step outside of those, we end up in a position where we are today, where we're seeking the guidance of the elected members and the council in terms of what we should do next.
So you say they are, and this is not being judgmental here, because the governing body can't point the finger at anyone when it comes to Section 76 to 78. If you say they are you saying they were they didn't apply, or because it's very specific, the requirements. The word must appears in every one. So are they kind of casually looked at, or are they just general awareness perhaps in the background? I'd like you to be a little bit more specific, because I'm trying to trace how this thing went wrong. And it's obviously it started off with your organisation, but in my opinion, your organisation must not carry the bulk of the blame. It's this we who should do that. So I'd just like a little bit more clarification on this.
Well, I guess the first point is we don't believe they have gone wrong, so disagree about that. In terms, I don't actually have the provisions in front of me, but in terms of decision-making, we are advised by our lawyers and the council legal department on how we carry out our processes and what we do take into account. So to the extent that there are legal obligations, I believe we are properly advised and the board's properly advised in terms of its considerations. I don't actually have the terms in front of me, so I can't answer very specifically what you're asking.
If I could attempt to assist. So obviously the obligations in Part 6 of the Local Government Act apply to local authorities. In practice, though, and against the background of a range of accountability documents that apply to Tātaki Auckland Unlimited, they seek to act consistently with the council's obligations when they are engaging with the public and, as Nick says, acting under delegation from the council. In terms of the decisions that are being made, the proposal following consultation is that there will be a further TAU board decision at which the views and preferences that have been gathered through the consultation process will be considered before the matter comes back to the governing body again. And that obviously gives the board an opportunity to consider people's views on Western Springs before taking any final decision, in the same way as the council does in accordance with its obligations under Section 78 of the Local Government Act.
Just make the point, thank you for that. I'll just make the point. The council was in a fix because of a decision already made, and in my view, and in the view of others, improperly made and outside the requirements of the law. That's the problem. Not what's going to happen in a have your say in the future, what already has happened. Thank you.
There's an opinion for you. Councillor Darby, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Nick and team. Just, Nick, can you just describe the structure and the skills at Tātaki in your executive management team and others that put together what is termed as extensive evaluation? You stress extensive evaluation. I'm just trying to get a sense of, the robustness of the process that was sitting behind the report writing that went to the board, your board, for decision making.
Yes, so if we go back to the EOI process itself, we were advised by an expert in procurement. So from a process point of view, the steps we took were based on professional advice. We received legal advice. We have within our organisation a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer, who is, without going into great detail, extremely qualified by any measure. We have a commercial group, likewise with a number of very experienced people who have managed the process. We had an evaluation panel that included outside external parties that brought experience around development, in particular, urban development. I'm just trying to remember who else was on that panel, but they were brought in to broaden out skills that we didn't have. We have the director of Auckland Stadiums, who has been involved in work on stadiums for I'm not sure exactly, but more than 10 years. He's been the director since for nearly 10 years. He's worked in consulting around stadiums. We have who am I missing here? We brought in the probity advice from PwC, and I myself have experience in the past 10 years in senior corporate roles, commercial roles, Chief Executive of Sport New Zealand, in a partner in a consulting firm, and indeed it's nearly 7 years since I've been in this role. So I do think I have a broad experience around a process like this.
Okay, thanks. And when looking at the options assessment, I think there were 11 key areas that were assessed. The so-called Auckland Arena proposal scored high out of, I think, 10 of 11, and then medium on financial sustainability. While not to dwell on them not being high in financial sustainability, I just wanted to understand, would there be a stronger understanding once you go to business case stage of the financial sustainability? And I am thinking the land value there, if we can call the value, it's actually more than land value, but it's got about 48 million on it. For a 50-year lease, I would be expecting to see quite a significant number come to council. Would all of that be drawn out through the business case? That's not something for now. That's the next stage.
Yeah, look, I think the board and management did talk a lot about the financial economic analysis of the options and how far can you go at this point. And it's only, I think we need to have the confidence that this is a option that warrants the kind of investment and that sort of analysis before we actually head down that track. And you're into a number of very, issues around scenarios. When you say it's got a land value of 48 million, it's only value if you're going to sell it. And is that ever realistic that selling Western Springs land for some purpose other than being the purposes under the trust? How realistic is that over the next 50 years? So there are a whole bunch of judgments that you would need to make to be able to undertake that sort of analysis.
And related to that too is the question of the Ponsonby Rugby Club. So Auckland Arena, which scores very highly on the through the evaluation process, it doesn't appear at this stage it's entertaining Ponsonby Rugby Club. Through the business case, could that be possibly brought back into the mix and Auckland Arena invited to look at that again through the business case?
Yeah, so look, the proposal is one that the promoters of the Auckland Arena have put forward on their terms, and that doesn't include Ponsonby Rugby, but it's always open to inviting them to look further at that. Whether it makes sense in terms of their proposal and their model, I can't comment on that.
And finally, on the names themselves, we're asked to consult on some Auckland Arena and Western Springs Bowl. When I go through all the assessment criteria, I can't see any reference to those titles. How did those titles, Auckland Arena and Western Springs Bowl, appear? Have we had confirmation from those parties that they are the easier to understand labels for the proposals? They were called something different before. I just wanted clarification on that.
Thanks, Councillor. We asked the proponents to come up with a name because they didn't have a name, and that's what they came up with.
And that's for clarity rather than calling it the MW
Correct.
Something or other. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Don't be too disappointed it's not the Derby Stadium yet, but Councillor Newman.
Nick, I wanted to, and thank you for your indulgence, Chair. Nick, I wanted to come back to the Tātaki Board's agreed that its current preferred option is the Auckland Arena option 1. I presume that's largely driven off the advice that it received. So I want to just go to, in the report at para 36 is table 2. It refers to estimated $200 to $300 million worth of private investment, which covers the upfront capital as well as the ongoing operational and maintenance costs. Could you describe for me any other situation where we've had that level of private investment available for anything, any project of this scale, to provide content offerings, events to any community in New Zealand? Or, I mean, it's a fantastic number. It's in the report. So, what's the comparison?
I can't think of an equivalent example. It drives enormous value in option 1, and you know a lot flows from that proposal.
Okay, well, it's a good offer. I haven't yet seen any deposits, but with respect to the next road down, it refers to the public investment. It refers to the public investment, where we're talking about estimated $13 million one-off cost of displacement for Ponsonby Rugby, where it refers to this displacement cost might be able to be picked up within the current LTP baselines. How do you arrive at the assumption that this might be able to be picked up?
Max is saying to me it's council's analysis, but I think the proposition is pretty straightforward, that the council is better off by $18 million if you adopt option 1, or we pursue option 1. If you're better off by $18 million, you can afford to reinvest some of that towards addressing the future of Ponsonby Rugby Club.
Actually, just want to clarify something on that answer. So the $80 million better off assumes already that we are contributing the $13 million. So if we weren't to do that, then I suppose the number would be, we would have been better off by, my maths is struggling me, with 32 million, I believe. So we're essentially, if you take what we were already expecting to spend on Western Springs, you don't need to spend that money if you go with that option. There's therefore some capital that's freed up, and that could be used to pay for the relocation costs. That's what's being proposed there.
Okay, so what we're talking about is an opportunity cost savings, which you've baked in and saying, yes, that's how we can do this. Is that a better way to describe it?
I think it's real money.
Okay, it's real money, so we've got to find $13 million,
which you would have had to spend otherwise.
To relocate Ponsonby Rugby Club.
Which you would have had to spend otherwise.
Okay. My next question is that I would assume that with no capex and no opex costs being incurred by the public, it's all going to be incurred by the private lessee, that the only way that they're going to get a return on their capital, which is $200 to $300 million, for the Western Springs site, is to effectively fully commercialise that site for 50 years.
So you're assuming that they will get a full commercial return on their investment?
Well, $200 to $300 million gift is quite extraordinary if there's no return on investment.
It is.
We did have the opportunity to speak directly to the proponents in those closed workshops, and that was put to them, and they did have that was confidential, so I can't necessarily go into it, but they did address this point about the genuineness of the offer and their expected return. we do believe that, and it's referred to in the report, that if we went down this option, the council would be concerned to make sure we retain community access and community benefits, and the indication that we had from the proponents is that that is something they are willing to negotiate and discuss with. So it's, yes, there is some commercial opportunities they're looking for. In fact, you know, the stadium is already intended to be operated somewhat commercially, consistent with Tātaki's trust deed. But community provision and access would remain important.
Okay, two final questions therefore. As I recall, if I recall, the clock's ticking on the offer for the capital raising. I assume that this is a relatively time-limited proposal. Can you give a sense as to when parties walk away if they don't get agreement here?
Certainly there is a cost to the length, how long the process takes, and it's challenging, and the parties who are clear about that. I can't give you a timeline.
My final question is that the presentation, you know, it was a wonderful virtual presentation of the Auckland Arena, but there was quite a significant transport infrastructure cost that's still going to be required in relation to entry, exits, what have you. Have we got any back of napkin calculations as to what that cost would be? That cost would have to be incurred by council, I presume.
Yes, Councillor, we have provided for some of those costs within the 13 million estimate. So that, as you say, in the table we referred to one-off public funding may be required to cover displacement of Ponsonby Rugby and upgrade of Stadium Road. It's a reference to upgrading access. So that's the figure that we've got at the moment.
Is whose figure is that? Is that AT's figure? Is that our figure? Is it their figure or Tātaki's? Who's come up with that number?
Yeah, it's our figure. Yeah, it's not a very long piece of road.
Thank you for that, Councillor Watson.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, just in terms of that equivalency comparator there. Are you aware of any other city, community in New Zealand where a public stadium, a major stadium, would be given over to, or has been given over to, a private franchise for 100 years to control 50 plus 25 plus 25?
No, I'm not aware of anything that's equivalent to what's proposed here.
Okay, so in terms of Mr. Hardy's comment about, I'll jump around a bit here between Speedway and the paper to do with Auckland Arena and the Bowl. In terms of the move to Waikaraka being quote unquote good and sustainable solution, in your consultation with the Western Springs stakeholders, are you aware of the statistical analysis they've done in terms of comparing the two sites? Have you had any conversation with them about that?
Look, I have to get James to respond on that.
So I'm going to have to start by asking if you could repeat the question.
Okay, so the question was that in the communications with the Western Springs stakeholders, if we can call them that, has there been any discussion or exchange of information in terms of a comparison of the area and other offerings of Western Springs compared to Waikaraka?
Sorry, can you clarify, when you're talking about Western Springs stakeholders, who are you referring to?
You're the organisation that says you've communicated with an entity, either albeit the promoters, that's the only person I think you've talked to, who have acted as the spokespeople for Speedway.
Sorry, okay, so you're referring back to the location analysis work? Because that was where the substantive consultation was, where we were looking at the different options.
Okay, so this is a little bit more basic than that. So the Western Springs Speedway Association, they've done their own analysis comparing the two sites in terms of the total area for the race cars, given in mind that we're combining two here, stock cars and Speedway. The total area for race cars, rigs and equipment, that comes in at 26% less. On-site car spaces, nearly 100% less. Seating capacity, 83% less in terms of potential growth. Total capacity, 90% less. Classes accommodated, bearing in mind there's only 5 classes, one's dropped off already down to 4. Meetings, exposure for sponsors, etc., etc. Some pretty fundamental things in terms of what would work or wouldn't work, and especially in light of Mr. Harley's reference to a good and sustainable solution, that doesn't seem to mesh with that descriptor. It seems to be going to something that's significantly smaller, and where the opportunities for growth are less. In fact, they're going to a more restricted site, particularly if we're coming out of COVID and we're looking for a growth and an upswing that's starting to take place in other codes now. We see that at other stadiums. Eventually you'd think this would catch up with motorsport, as indeed it did for the final night when there were 14,000 people there. So I'm taking it no one's really had a discussion with anyone connected with Speedway in terms of that statistical comparison.
I can respond to that and can advise that through the location analysis work that all of the key user groups and clubs, including those participating at Western Springs, were surveyed on their requirements, and that has informed the design work at Waikaraka Park. So for example, there are more pits at Waikaraka Park than there are at Western Springs, and the pits that are being designed are significantly larger than the existing pits at Western Springs.
Can I just also respond to that? And look, it's a fair question. I just do want to remind the governing body the decision before you today is one about consultation with the public. The decision about Waikaraka Park and the funding of that was made in October. And prior to that decision, there was the location analysis, which James has just referred to, and we also did speak with a number of parties. The $11 million which is being invested in Waikaraka Park, in our view, reflects a substantial investment by the council in a dedicated motorsport facility that will offer a good outcome for the sport. It provides for more consented race days than Western Springs, and a track design that's suitable for all vehicle classes. Because it's got the consenting benefit, it will be more utilised, and utilisation will enable it to be financially sustainable, wash its face, and promote and encourage greater investment in the facility. It isn't the same as Western Springs, and as we addressed in that report, a number of people involved would have preferred to stay at Western Springs, which is a major regional stadium and one of the most valuable assets this council has. So it totally makes sense that some of them wanted to stay in that, but as a council and as a governing body, you'll need to consider a range of different possible uses and think about how these things could be used to maximise the benefits for Aucklanders. So we have provided for motorsport. There's a really substantial investment going into that. In terms of capacity, which we addressed in that report, Waikaraka Park has a lower capacity than Western Springs, obviously, which is a stadium. But its capacity is 4,600. There's a master plan to ultimately increase that to 8,000. And that capacity is more than suitable for the vast majority of races over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. There's 1 or 2 exceptions, but generally events have averaged around 3,500. And what we are seeking through our investment in networks is fuller venues that are full and well utilised. And at the moment, that isn't the case. That very clearly isn't the case at Western Springs, and it will, we hope, will be the case at Waikaraka Park.
With all due respect, I don't think the last 3 or 4 or 5 years is a very fair representation of crowd analysis at Western Springs, given it was COVID for 2 or 3 years and then it got flooded and it was virtually, inoperable for quite some significant period of time. So I think my view is the last turnout is more, if you're looking to grow things, that's a more accurate assessment of what the competitors would be looking to address. But leave that aside. I want to go. I want to go to the notion, and these things are all mixed up in this report. So if some stuff gets relitigated, there's not much you can do about that. But what I would say, Mr. Hardy, is that it'll be, as I understand it, the 5 classes of Speedway are represented in the new association. So I guess as a councillor who's tried to take an interest in that, I go on the people who are involved in the sport and their assessment of the situation, not, with all due respect, officials in here, because they are the people who have spent the better part of their life doing that. So it would be nice if we had some sense, and they were denied it today, where questions could have been asked of them. They don't actually get a chance to speak. They haven't had a chance. They've been denied speaking rights twice. So it is hard to get a sense of the people who know what they're talking about, who are far more knowledgeable than the likes of me, but they've just been shut out of this process altogether. Yeah. And instead, as we've had admitted today, we've concentrated on the promoters, who have a financial interest, of course, and are hardly seen as being representative of those racing classes, which the association is. I'll move on for that to the analysis of the Auckland arena, and I'm really struggling to understand here. On the one hand, the statement's sort of made that there will be flow-on effects for the other stadium, so that is acknowledged. But then on the other hand, we have the throwaway comment then that the proposal won't affect them. So if we take a good example of that, variously through both the presentation by MWF Newco and on interviews on TV, I've heard their representatives say at various times that they would be looking to accommodate in some shape or form their own club, obviously Auckland FC, men's and women's when it comes, so that they come out of Mount Smart. They must come out of North Harbour as their training base. They've mentioned looking to attract the Warriors franchise, and if you remember, the Warriors have had a good run the last couple of years, of course, but prior to that, 2017, 18, 19, their numbers are sit around about the 12,000 average, so they would be a target. They're a franchise, private franchise, so they'll go where they get the best deal. Where they've also mentioned concerts. So if we take away Blues, Auckland Rugby, Warriors, the training bases as the high performance centres, as with North Harbour Stadium, that amounts to a significant cannibalisation of the content. And it's not content that's easily replaced. Who's coming along? Who's the next franchise? What code that they're going to replace it with? I don't see any. So I would just say and seek your comment in terms of that potential flow-on effect to the council's other network, who I'm assuming we're trying to look after North Harbour and Mount Smart as well. We're trying to look after them. They inevitably get affected by this, particularly if they're successful in attracting other content.
Can I have just a point of order, please? I'm just trying to understand, and I'm wondering if we need the amendment, because it's 1.7.2 D, C, relevance, because the question that we have before us today is about going out to consultation. That's the decision that we're here to make. We're going all over the place. Now, if there's an amendment that then the councillors can speak to, so we're a bit clearer, that would be really helpful. So could I get a decision on that, please?
But sorry,
it's fair
sorry,
enough.
Mr. Chair, I'm
To
quoting...
the chair,
I'm quoting
I would like
point
my point.
68, in the analysis that couldn't make anything more central to what we're talking about today. Are we allowed to question what's in the paper? Have you read that, Councillor Goldberg? That's what the question is.
Yeah, and I've had so much more information from you and Councillor Walker to add to boot, but I would like my point of order decided.
At this stage, we're just going through questions, but we've wandered way past that into comment. So I think you guys can retire for the moment until...
Sorry.
Well, then I've apparently got some amendments to discuss.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. It's a fundamental question that the officers themselves have referred to. It goes to the issue of displacement of content.
Well, that's what the consultation is about. We guys have got into outcomes. We're only talking about a consultation here. Do we go to consultation? If you want to go to consultation, then those things will come up.
This is part of the consultation. So that they need to answer whether that's going to be in there. Is my observation valid or not? Otherwise, we're going out with another North Harbour where the Professor of Market Analytics criticised the biased nature of the council's options.
You can find anyone who opposes something or other, mate. So I would actually like a question myself before it goes. This is a question.
Okay, I'm happy to answer that question around the degree to which the proposal in option 1 would cannibalise other stadiums in the network. My understanding from the proposal is that it is primarily proposed as a football stadium, that creates conflicts with other, particularly rugby codes, and it's very difficult to accommodate both rugby codes and football codes. It might be possible on some occasions. It's certainly not possible, I would have thought, to be able to do all of the things that you listed. So for it to be a football stadium, it's about the quality of the turf, and part of the whole proposition here is it's a quality football experience for high performance and for match days. And the heart of that proposal is that that's what it is.
They play at different times of years. They have different season. It is possible to accommodate them too. The soccer season plays in the summer. Final question, Mr. Mayor, and I'll make it really short. We had a presentation from Eden Park today that showed very clearly how they, in their new configuration that we all approved unanimously, they can cater for crowds between 5 and 70,000 in particular, with the new technology retractable seating that can be put up in 30 minutes. They can provide exactly the same capacity crowd boutique stadium at Eden Park as is being proposed at Western Springs. How can that not constitute a double up?
Here.
The difference is, of course, that these guys bring their own crowd and they can choose to put it where they like. That's part of what they're... That's why we're consulting. I want to hear from the public. We've heard from you people for 7 hours before. So this is about going to the public. So, and I'd just like a simple question. Can...
answer to the question other than one from you?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to answer the question. Yeah, the first obvious point, of course, is Eden Park's plans are not funded. So, yes, they've been endorsed conditionally by the governing body, but there is currently no funding for those plans. So, nevertheless, it's relevant to consider the rest of the network when you make a decision about which of these options you prefer, because what we are trying to do is invest in a network which is complementary, a complementary set of venues. In our view, which is an initial assessment, and further analysis will follow as we go through this process and we hear from the public. It is the option 1 provides something which is broadly complementary to the network because it's something that doesn't currently exist in terms of its size and its focus, and because it's serving a sport that is growing and frankly the professional football didn't really exist in the network a few years ago in the way that it does now. So yes, there are impacts on the rest of the network that need to be considered, and we attempt to do so. But I don't believe that Eden Park, and I don't think they would say this, that their proposal would enable them to do everything that Auckland Arena is proposing to do. Because yes, there's capacity, but then there are scheduling conflicts and other issues. So ultimately, you do need a range of venues and of different sizes in the network.
Thank you. Councillor Hills has a question.
Yes, thank you. The proposals, the two that came through the EOI, I just have some questions on that. So we had we've been working on the hard court and community facilities funding. There was additional money in the LTP, and I see especially what are you calling it, option 1. Has that been built? Have they built their decision around indoor courts based on our lack of, because we've been told over and over we have a severe lack of indoor courts across the network. Have they been working on our policy direction, or has it just happened to be coincided at the same time?
Look, I think that it's very well understood that there's a shortage of particularly indoor basketball courts, and in terms of developing their proposal, they're seeking to meet a need that's obvious in the city, which is consistent with the challenge that the council faces.
And I mean, it would be great if at some point, if one of these went ahead, that they would include Ponsonby Rugby, but I'm assuming it's difficult when you're both putting proposals ahead not to say you'll work together to undermine that. But what is the understanding around, we normally don't pay for club rooms, we contribute to either the playing surfaces or buildings. It suggests we would, under all options, contribute to Ponsonby Rugby Club rooms. Could you explain that decision under all of the options?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's for me. We do. There is some sort of comparison information about the sorts of funding that has been provided to community sport facilities, which is provided. It's an attachment to the Tātaki Board report, attachment 9. The sort of funding that Ponsonby Rugby is seeking for club rooms within option 2 is out of proportion to the funding that other clubs have received for similar facilities. That doesn't mean it's not a possible thing for you to do, but it is the advice that we would provide is that it's not consistent with the sorts of funding that we've provided similar facilities, as shown in that analysis. I think, but it is. I don't think what you said was quite right when you said we don't provide funding for club rooms. We do provide funding for some club rooms, and in this case, where we would be essentially displacing Ponsonby Rugby from their current location and their current club rooms, we think it would be a reasonable thing for the council to consider as a contribution to relocated club rooms. And consistent with our usual approach, we would certainly be encouraging. I think Ponsonby Rugby would support this. Some form of multi-sport club rooms. Multiple purposes, not single use.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to understand. It sounds broader than a club room. Sort of like a. Yeah. So that makes more sense. The concerns I have around, and I'm sure that is the ability for the EOI applicants, I guess, to reconsider, redesign. What does that look like through consultation? Because I have a real concern about, say, the number of car parks that the option 1 proposes on green space. I'm aware that not all of it is technically reserved, but in 2025, do we really need that sort of level of car parking on can we just improve the public transport? Is there ability for some parking or it to be sleeved within buildings? I just worry about the level of green space taken up by
So Councillor, I think there would be, we're at a stage of the process where they provide expressions of interest, and that is really an early stage of the process, and there's quite a bit to go. And if we do progress, there would be sorry, I'll start again. Depending on the feedback received, staff will engage with the proponents and interested third parties to seek clarification and invite responses to matters that have been raised during the process, and we'll be able to provide you that information at the meeting. It would also be open to the governing body to provide that feedback in any direction in any decision you make about a preference, because there is then full commercial negotiations, there's a business case required and due diligence required. So the proposals are at that EOI stage and still need to be developed based on your and the public direction.
And the context for that, because I heard some sniggers, is around, the reduction in playable space. If more people want to use the space, there are trade-offs. The other question is, and I guess it's through the consultation, we're going to have to explain to people, and there may be concerns about Waikaraka say, what, because my understanding is, I was obviously away for the previous decision, but is my understanding the promoter, the person who was leasing Western Springs for Speedway, is agreeing and is part of the process. There's an $11 million upgrade going on in Waikaraka. Well, that obviously is not going to stop, is it?
That's right, Councillor. That Council is now financially committed to that project, and those works are underway, as Nick mentioned before, and it is also correct that the most recent promoter is supporting the consolidation of Speedway at Waikaraka Park.
So is there, I'm just trying to understand the logistics of future decisions. Is there a possibility we end up could have two Speedway promoters? I'm not talking about stock cars, I'm talking about, we've got an agreed Speedway leasee or promoter, and then the other Speedway group who've...
Yeah, Councillor, that could potentially have some significant implications. So it would undermine the case for investment at Waikaraka Park, first and foremost, which is already underway. So that the case for that investment was based on consolidation, and there would be a requirement for the council to find an alternative funding source for the $11 million allocated to that project. And then there would be a potential to have two competing venues, and you do risk losing the sustainability and utilisation benefits that I spoke about before, with consolidation, and possibly requiring the council to invest more in the ongoing maintenance and renewal of Waikaraka Park, because the current arrangements is based on the promoter maintaining the venue, because they're expecting that greater utilisation, and if they don't get that greater utilisation, they'll probably come back to the council and say the council needs to pay for that, so we end up paying for two venues. That's potential downside of that scenario.
Okay, and last question, Matt. So whatever is chosen will then have a design process that comes through community facilities. Everyone would then be part of that process of, the size, the scale, what is needed, the missing gaps based on other policies, or is what they've proposed kind of what has to go forward? I'm thinking about the conversations around Ponsonby, around who uses or has access to those hard courts, things like that. Because it will be quite a different, you're going to have a commercial lease, but also community access, which is how I'm trying to understand it.
I think the answer is yes, that if we get to the point where that's our preferred option, then there will be commercial negotiations about the details of that, and that will include discussions about community access.
Councillor Filipona.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I just ask, do we know how many amendments will be forthcoming? Just as an indicator. I know there's one that my colleague on my right has indicated.
Councillor Turner has indicated.
So just the one, okay. I'm going to, through you, Chair, I'm going to save my questions because depending on the amendment, I may have questions relating to whether this amendment goes through, and I think that's important for me to see whether that actually changes our, at the moment, it hasn't been moved and seconded, but, it has? Yes. Okay, yeah, but I mean, I'm just going to wait for the amendment, and then I will most probably have questions after that, depending on what happens with that amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm interested in the finances as the person responsible for the ratepayers' bills. What's the long and short-term costs of each option? Or short and long-term costs, whichever way you like to do it, of each one.
Thank you, Mayor. We do address a summary of the financial impact of the options is included in paragraph 36. There's a table there, and the assessment is that the net financial impact on ratepayers of the baseline, which is option 3A on the right-hand side, that's essentially based on renewing Ponsonby Rugby's lease and maintaining the venue as a concert and festival venue. So the base case, option 3A, has a 50-year cost of $31 million and a 10-year cost of $9.9 million. So comparing the other options against that case, the Western Springs Bowl option 2 has a 50-year cost, additional to that baseline cost of $106 million and a 10-year cost of $35 million. And for option 1, the assessment is that the 50-year impact is a $18.1 million savings to ratepayers compared to the baseline. And that accounts for displacement costs, as I mentioned earlier. But there's over the first 10 years, there's a $3.1 million additional cost. And the reason for that is that there's an initial sort of impact from the lost revenue because the venue is leased, and then that initial investment required for displacement costs and access upgrades. But over time, there's a big financial benefit to council because we're not paying for the maintenance and renewal of the asset anymore.
Oh, that's pretty good, thanks. And that's sort of the consultation. If we go to consultation, all this information will be out there for people. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, that's very good. That's the end of those. Now, we have a foreshadowed one from Councillor Turner, who's raised it in his debate. Is he going to move it? Are you going to move that? Yeah, but publicly you're going to move it, so I can...
Sorry,
verbally.
Yeah, I move it, thank you.
And seconded by?
Councillor Walker.
Okay, got that, thank you. I'm just going to adjourn for 5 minutes while we get people to review what the impact of that is. Okay? No, it's going to go up so that you see it, and we get those people to have advice, particularly legal advice, to what it means. Okay? So I'll stop for 5 minutes, read that, and I'd like some feedback from Max and Meredith on the merits of that, please.